Okay. Maybe not. Okay. It's on. It's okay. So, all right. So we were talking about the Munich Pact, right? And so first came Austria, right? So Hitler, we got to this, right? Okay. So Hitler invades Austria, doesn't have to fire a shot. He goes after the Sudetenland, right? And instead of fighting, which the Czechs were hoping to do, the British and the French came to the rescue with this Munich Pact or this Munich Agreement. Okay, I do have a short video on this that I want to share with you from our friend Jim Lenzag from the Council on Foreign Relations that we watched the other day. Okay, I have that pulled up, ready to go here in a second. But as we learned yesterday, he returns to London, a hero. We have peace in our time, and then obviously this ends in failure. Appeasement exposed here when Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia in March. So this took place in September. By March, he's going to march his troops into Czechoslovakia. They will not fight. The Czechs will not fight. The Alps are gone. One of the things I failed to mention to you yesterday about this, in drawing this map of the Sudetenland, okay, is that in the Sudetenland, which is here, right, you have the Alps, okay, so those are no longer a barrier for the Germans, okay. Inside the Sudetenland is something called the Skoda Works, okay, and the Skoda Works is like an industrial area where they have the second largest munitions factory in Europe. What are munitions? Bullets, bombs, shells, that sort of thing for war. So once the Germans come into the Sudetenland, and by the way, the largest munitions factories in Europe are in Germany, so now they will control the two largest munitions factories in Europe. The Germans will. Okay, so that's a byproduct of this. And then in March, after he brings his troops in, they will take the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay, kind of illustrating the failure of appeasement here, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So on your test, writing about appeasement, citing examples of it, the Munich Pact is probably the single best example you could use. You don't have to use it. There are many others. Okay, let's bring in our friend Jim Lenzag from the Council of Foreign Relations and see what he has to say about this.
A big power intimidates its neighbors. A crisis erupts. World leaders meet to head off war. A deal is struck and peace is proclaimed. But rather than deterring aggression, the deal inadvertently promotes it. Within a year, the world is at war. I'm Jim Lenzag, and this is History Lessons. Our topic today is the Munich Agreement, which was signed by the leaders of Germany, Italy, Britain, and France in the early morning hours of September 30th, 1938. The backdrop to the Munich Agreement is Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany's remilitarization. Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany in 1933.
We already watched this.
A year later, he made himself a dictator, or Führer, and ushered in the Third Reich. Hitler moved aggressively to jumpstart a foundering German economy and to jettison the constraints that had been imposed on the German military after World War I. European leaders nervously looked the other way as he ran roughshod over the security provisions of the Treaty of Versailles and reasserted German power in Central Europe. One goal of Hitler's policies was to create Lebensraum, or greater living space for Germans. The belief that Germany needed expanded borders included the idea that ethnic Germans living in neighboring countries should come under German rule. In March 1938, Germany absorbed Austria in the Anschluss, Hitler then turned his attention to the Sudetenland, those parts of Czechoslovakia where some 3 million ethnic Germans predominated. Hitler grew increasingly hostile to Czechoslovakia over the course of the summer of 1938. In mid-September, he gave a fiery anti-Czech speech, raising fears that war was imminent. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain responded by rushing to Germany for talks to keep the continent at peace. Chamberlain approached his talks with Hitler, mindful of how the First World War had laid waste to a generation of Europeans, and worried that new technologies like the airplane would make the next war even more horrific. He also worried that the British military was still prepared to fight Germany, and that the British public wanted peace, not war. So without consulting Czechoslovakian leaders, Chamberlain agreed to Hitler's demand that Germany absorb the Sudetenland. Chamberlain then persuaded the Czechoslovakian and French governments to accept his concession. The details were worked out at two subsequent sets of meetings. The Czechoslovakian government was pointedly not invited to the concluding talks at Munich that finalized the country's dismemberment. On October 1st, 1938, Czechoslovakian frontier guards left their posts and German troops moved into the Sudetenland. The day before, Chamberlain had flown back to London where he was met by cheering crowds. He waved a memo Hitler had signed pledging Germany's peaceful intentions and told the crowd that he had brought peace for our time.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. Here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains. I would just like to read it to you. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Not all of Chamberlain's fellow Britons believed that he had saved the day. Winston Churchill's response to what Chamberlain had brought at Munich was withering. You were given a choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war. As we all know, Churchill was right. 11 months after the Munich Agreement was signed to cheers, German troops invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. The terms Munich and appeasement entered the diplomatic hall of shame. What is the lesson of the Munich Agreement? Just this. Appeasing an adversary's demands may diffuse a crisis, but it can also increase the chances of war by emboldening that adversary to demand more. Chamberlain thought that if Germany gained the Sudetenland, that Hitler would finally be satisfied with the status quo in Europe. But Hitler instead viewed Munich as confirming his belief that Britain and France both lacked the will to stop German expansion. It's worth remembering the Munich Agreement as we survey potential threats around the globe today. China is a growing military power that is challenging the territorial claims of its neighbors.
So we kind of already talked about that stuff. So, yeah, that gives you a picture of it, and actually the video of Chamberlain holding up this piece of paper here. So, I threw in some political cartoons here, guys, about appeasement during the time period, and then this map here of how this agreement kind of worked itself out in Munich. So here's a good map of the Sudetenland here, with 3 million ethnic Germans lived here, but also this Czech territory was given to Hungary by Germany in October of '38, and then Poland went ahead and annexed this from Czechoslovakia, probably for defensive purposes, in November of '38. So you can see Czechoslovakia is basically carved up here, right, by this agreement. This is Dr. Seuss as a political cartoon. Most of you guys are familiar with Dr. Seuss. And on this platform, the most amazing marvel of the age. He lives, he talks, yet the guy has no guts. It's the appeaser. This would be maybe modern day appeasement with terrorism. So the bone says appeasement there, and you got this wolf represents terrorism. See, I give nice doggy a bone and he goes away. Okay. Yeah. Here's another one. dealing with the Nazis. They got this creepy octopus thing here, and they'll play him a nice song, and maybe he won't eat you. This is a little bit more political, but 21st century journalism in the 20th century. So maybe if journalists today were covering World War II, they might say something like, U.S. overreacts, nukes Japan, President ignores pleas for proportional response to Pearl Harbor War. By invading here at Normandy, the Allies are collectively punishing the French for their Nazi occupation of their country. Maybe that's how they'd cover it today. We'll see. I don't know. Okay. All right, moving forward. All right, so more war. Okay. Hitler has taken Austria and Czechoslovakia. We haven't gotten to Poland yet, but it's coming. And the start of World War II is coming. So on April 7th, 1939, does everybody remember where Albania is on the map? It's near the Mediterranean, but it's actually on the Adriatic Sea. Yes. Between. Yes, I know it is. I was there this summer. Okay, so here's Italy. See the boot of Italy. Here's the heel. Okay, right across from the heel in the Adriatic is Albania. And yeah, this is about as far south. We've made it pretty far south this summer. Down here, went into Bosnia and Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik is pretty far down the south here, which is a really cool place to visit, buddy. So if any of you guys are fans of, I forget the name of the show, Game of Thrones. They filmed several scenes in Games of Thrones there in Dubrovnik, in the old city. Okay, so Italy invades Albania from across the heel here. Okay, and then after this, and after the rest of Czechoslovakia is taken, Britain assures Poland, Greece, and Romania that if they are attacked, they will go to war. Okay, this Chamberlain is still in power. Okay, and much of this is going to take place, just not yet. Now, this is an interesting one, guys. Roosevelt chimes in, and he sends a letter to Adolf Hitler. Basically, in this letter, he's asking Hitler. He said, you know, what you're doing is dangerous. Please stop. He sends him a list of 31 countries and asks them not to attack these nations for at least 10 years. This is a bit of a head scratcher. And it's a head scratcher for Hitler as well. So Hitler decides to read this letter in front of the German Reichstag from President Roosevelt, mocking the President of the United States. Okay. He says things like, we want no Poles. We want no Norwegians. We want no Finns. And he goes through the list, and they're all mucking it up, laughing at this letter. Okay, of course, he's going to invade a bunch of those countries. Okay, but this kind of pisses off Roosevelt. Like, this son of a gun, okay, mocking me. So Roosevelt goes to Congress. He's like, listen, not only do we need to sell weapons, but we need to sell munitions. We need to end this arms embargo. We need to start helping our friends against this Hitler guy instead of being neutral. What does Congress say? No. Okay, we're staying neutral. This is where the American people are. American people don't want this. So we're going to stay neutral. So then we got to check in a little bit, again, with what's going on with Japan and our relationship with Japan. That's a picture of the German Reichstag there, okay? Now, Congress agrees to give the president the power to end its commercial treaty with Japan. That means we would stop trading with Japan. We don't do this yet, but when the president is ready, he'll be able to pull the trigger on it and stop trading with Japan. Okay? But one of the most important materials, as you can imagine, raw materials or processed materials, is rubber, tires. Yes, for vehicles. This is of huge importance. And if you guys did the homework, one of the things that was rationed, we had rationing, right? Those guys did the homework, was rubber. And as as we're all wearing shoes right now, a lot of the soles of your shoes are made out of rubber, right? So, guys, during the Depression and World War II, guys, especially during the war, it was hard to find new shoes. It's hard to find rubber. It was rationed very much. Tires for automobiles, very difficult to buy. I have a video I can show you that on the home front. At some point, maybe I'll show you that video. That, people were making tires out of wood. It was bad, okay? So, and we're selling a lot of rubber to Japan. The other big thing we're selling to Japan is oil. So they've been using these things to attack, and China is a friend. I wouldn't call them a great ally, but they're our friend. Okay, so when President Roosevelt's ready to do this, he's going to be able to stop trading with Japan. But not yet. Does that make sense? Okay. It's coming. What time is this class over today? 25. She left roller, didn't she? Okay. We're good here? All right. Next, the world is going to be shocked by what happens next. Okay. Who do the Nazis hate? They hate communists. They hate Russia. In the video, our friend Jim Lenzag just talked about Lebensraum, living space. Okay, so this next slide is going to be a shock to people that the Russians and the Germans are going to sign a pact, which is on this next slide. Okay, and it's called a Non-Aggression Pact. Now, this is confusing to the German people because they've been told all this time that the communists are the enemy. And so people are really surprised by this. So, that poor country that lies between Germany and Russia, of course, you know your geography, is Poland. And war is coming to Poland. So this agreement, which is signed in this photograph here, in this picture, now Hitler's not in this photograph. He's not at this meeting, but Uncle Joe is. There's Joseph Stalin, okay? This over here is General Ribbentrop of the German army. And then sitting here is, I don't know how to say his first name, but the foreign commissioner Molotov here. So this could also be called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Agreement or Pact, or you could just call it a non-aggression pact between Russia and Germany. Okay, if you had to call it something. Yes, sir.
We didn't know that really.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop? I mean, you can. Some people refer to it as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or agreement. some people just refer to it as a non-aggression pact between Germany and Russia, which surprises people, as I said. But there's a secret plan to this, okay? They don't tell the world the secret part of the plan. Secret part of the plan is that Russia and Germany have secretly decided to divide Poland between the two powers. Germans will get the west part of Poland, and the Russians will get the east part of Poland. They don't tell anybody that. People will figure it out once the invasion begins from both sides. Story time? Story time? Okay. What's the capital of Poland? Okay. Now, if you look at this map, this is the agreement made. Okay, the Ribbentrop-Molotov line is this yellow line here. Okay, and then the Polish border here. So if I were to draw Poland, which I'm not very good at drawing, right? So we're just going to make Poland look like that. Okay. And you can see Warsaw is in the middle. Put this over here. Okay. So, on September 1st, 1939, 9/1/39, okay, Germany is going to invade Poland. Okay. 2 weeks later, on 9/17/39, the Soviet Union is going to invade Poland. Okay. It might be the 14th. I think it's 17th. It's on the next slide, or one of the slides. Okay. But anyhow, I want to tell a story about what happened here. Okay, so it ends up looking more like this. In the end. Okay. So 90% of the Polish army is on the Western Front. They are going to fight. Now, the Brits said, and the French said, if Poland is invaded, we're going to war. Does that mean that British troops were already in Poland? No. So the Poles are on their own. Okay? Now, as I will describe for you next week, the Germans employ this new type of warfare called blitzkrieg. Okay, and I'll go through that with you in great detail what that means. But it's overwhelming. And so the Poles are going to retreat, okay, around Warsaw. But they will fight. And since it's 90% of their army, the Germans are not going to be able to move too quickly. But with only 10% of the Polish army on the Eastern Front, the Russians are going to be able to move very rapidly when they enter. And what happened to this small town that was just north of Warsaw, small town called Genowabe in Poland. It's a town of about 3,000 people, but it's a unique town because this town has about 1,500 of their population, close to half, were Jews. Now, guys, there's over 3 million Jews in Poland. Okay? And so this small town had about half Pole, half Jew. Now, what religion are the Poles mostly? What? What kind of Christian? You were to go to Poland today, vast majority of its people are what? They're Catholic. Okay? Who's from there? Pope John Paul II is from Poland. Okay? So he was alive when this was happening. Now, this small town, you think the Jews in Poland have heard how the Nazis feel about Jews by 1939? Yes, they know. Do you think the Jews, when they hear that the Germans have invaded their country, that the Jews are concerned? Absolutely. Okay? So what happened in this town is quite scary. Now, when I was in graduate school, guys, my professor gave us this book to read. Okay? It's called Neighbors. It was published in, I think, 1992, because this story was not known outside of Poland and Russia until 1991. Okay, and this researcher went in and found there was a court case that he read about and researched and wrote this book about what happened in this small town. So, because the Russians were moving so quickly, they went too far. The Germans had not reached Genoa yet. Can you imagine the relief of the Jews in this small town when the first soldiers to show up in their town were Russian and not German? These Jews were relieved. In fact, they were ecstatic. Oh, thank God you're here, communists, Red Army. Thank God you're here, because we were worried the Germans were coming. And so the Jews in this town were very accommodating to an invading enemy. How do you think the Poles that lived in this town felt about how the Jews were behaving? Maybe you could use a term like brown-nosing or kissing their butt, you know, this sort of thing. How do you think the Poles felt about that, the Jews doing that? They were not pleased with it. And so, within a couple of days, the Russians realized they had gone too far. They had crossed the Molotov-Ribbentrop line and that they needed to retreat. So the Russians leave. And about a week later, guess who shows up? The Germans show up. Now, when you study the Holocaust, guys, the German infantry, the Wehrmacht, these guys, they don't deal with the Jewish problem. Their job is to kill enemy soldiers and win battles. So it's the German infantry that shows up in Genoa. Well, the Poles, everybody's scared, guys. Everybody's scared. They don't know what's going to happen. The Poles don't know what's going to happen. The Jews don't know what's going to happen. But so the Poles start kind of kissing the Germans' butts, if you will, cozying up to these German infantry. And the German infantry are like, yeah, just, we'll tell you what to do. Just we don't need to talk, you know. But they're trying to cozy favor, and they know the Germans don't like the Jews. So one way to curry favor with the Nazis, these German soldiers, is to say, do you need any help dealing with these Jews? Because the Poles are kind of pissed at the Jews the way they behave with the communists. And the German infantry is like, no, we don't deal with that. Go away. Well, they kind of insisted because they were worried and they were scared. Okay? What generally happened was there's a group that comes in behind the infantry to deal with the Jews. It's a group called the Einsatzgruppen. The Einsatzgruppen would come in after the infantry, identify who Jews were, and either send them to labor camps, or in Poland, typically what happened is they set up ghettos. Because there were so many Jews. 3 million guys. So Warsaw becomes a ghetto, where they're going to pile in hundreds of thousands of Jews into a small section of Warsaw and house them there while they decide what to do with them. Does that make sense? Now, a lot of them are going to die in these ghettos because of lack of food, water, disease, and so forth. So what ends up happening is some of these Poles start behaving badly, and they start like going after the Jews, trying to bring them to the Germans. And there's some fights that break out. There's some looting of Jewish homes. A couple of Jews get killed, and the town leaders are like, we got to figure this out. So the town leaders started rounding up all the Jews in the town. By this time, about 300 Jews had escaped. Like, they're just literally running away, running into the woods, trying to escape the town. But about 1,200 Jews were brought to the town square and presented to the Germans. And again, the Germans are like, no, we're not dealing with this. And so the town leaders end up putting the Jews into a barn. There's a large barn near the town center. 1,200 Jews into the barn. Shut the doors and they lock it. Then they burn it. This is something that could only happen in a war. It's a horrible story. This book called Neighbors really describes it. So 1,200 innocent Jews were murdered, not by the Nazis, but by their neighbors. People that they have worked with, gone to school with, done business together with each other over generations of families. It's a horrible story. Now, how did we find out about it? After World War II, guys, Poland is going to be communist for 40 years. The Russians are going to take it over after World War II. The Russians actually put some of these town leaders on trial for mass murder. But Russia's a secret society. They don't really, this doesn't go into the newspapers and stuff like this, so nobody knew about it. But the trial transcripts were all in the archives. So this researcher, Jan Gross, went into those archives when communism collapsed in Europe and found this case, this trial, that described the witnesses to it and so forth, and wrote this book about it. Okay? It's a very sad tale. And guys, when you study the Holocaust, the more you study it, the darker it gets, because if you go into different countries, as the Germans went into, places like Lithuania, it was the Lithuanian people, out of fear mostly, I would say, some anti-Semitism, but they would help the Germans round up the Jews and kill the Jews. In Romania, in Bulgaria, and in Poland. Okay? So, sorry, it's a sad tale, but one that I thought I would share with you that's not in most history books. All right, so that is a byproduct of this agreement here, okay? Now, why would Stalin go along with this? You wonder why he would go along with this? I think what he was thinking, because, Lebensraum, he's talked about he's going to invade Russia. That's part of his plan. It's in Mein Kampf. I think Stalin was looking for a buffer. If he could move some of his troops further outside of Russia, would give him somewhat of a buffer against Germany once they did invade. Okay? And if you read about this time period with Stalin, it's a lot of it's head scratching. The guy, I don't understand what he was doing. I mean, they won, but they did lose between 20 and 25 million people. Okay, 25. All right, let's just call it a day right there. Okay, call it a week. So we'll pick up from here on Monday. How many guys are in anatomy? I guess there's a field trip Tuesday or something. None of you guys taking anatomy? Going to see dead people? All right. Like and subscribe.